Hi, I'm Sharaad Kuttan and welcome to Consider This. South China Morning Post newspaper recently ran a headline with, in Malaysia's Johor, forest reserves are being replaced with gold mines and oil palm plantations. But that's not the only story to tell with regard to the environment of Johor. It's a place of incredible biodiversity, and we're going to explore that as well as the challenges that come from deforestation. I have with me today Vincent Chow. He's the Vice President of the Malaysian Nature Society and a Johorian. Vincent, thank you so much for joining me on the show. I did start with that headline. It is a headline that I guess highlights some of the serious challenges to the environment and the trade-offs that are being made in terms of economic activity versus environmental integrity. But perhaps, Vincent, we can begin with locating Johor in the larger peninsula in terms of ecological and environmental issues.
Okay. Johor is on the most southernmost tip of the peninsula that resembles a piece of land that looks like your tongue. It has a very long coastline of about 48 kilometers stretching from the Muar side, coming down south and going up to Kuala Lumpur. Now, that tells you that we have fantastic, different shaded habitats of wildlife and plants. And in the midst of this, it encompasses a piece of land that is dotted with many hills. We have the highest and the second highest in the south. You heard of Gunung Ledang or Mount Ophir, which also happened to be nicknamed as the Golden Mountain by the Chinese for obvious reasons. It was mined for gold long ago. So basically, Johor started with agriculture in the good old days of Sultan Abu Bakar. He brought in a lot of these people from China, from Indonesia, and it was center of Gambia industry, pepper industry, so on and so forth. And even after the Second World War, there was a German guy who took possession of vast tracts of land in Pontian, which is on the southwestern coast, where he grew pineapples to supply the textile industry with pineapple fiber. In those days, most of the dresses were made from that particular material. And until today, he has left over a big cement vault where he used to hide his gold bars as payment when he went to Singapore to collect. And he was often robbed. So today, if you go to Paris, German, you can see the remnant of that particular, what you call, unusual German, who made his money growing pineapple for the textile industry. So if you look at Johor, it's peculiar in the sense that from the mountain to the sea, the number of habitats that you come across does allow numerous and complicated kind of setup of the biodiversity, whether it's fishes or birds or reptiles. So what does this all mean? So every time you chop down some forest, there'll be uproar from conservationists and nature lovers. But the sad fact is, you want Johor to progress, you cannot be keeping it under forest system all the time, although there is a department to manage the forestry, the forest of Johor. There's always this unhappiness when some trees are chopped down. I can understand that because, I myself have seen the enormous change in Johor from a child of 10 years old to a man that has been around for almost, I'm already 70-something. The sad loss is this, that you cannot go against the needs of the populace as we multiply. So somehow, economically, you need activities to sustain you, sustain the state, sustain the country. The only problem is citing the report, as Sharaad said just now. When you say many gold mines, I'm very surprised. I would say, you show me where the gold mines are. When you say a lot of oil palm plantation, I agree. But a lot of this are done by the government for the people. Some are private ownership. So wherever or any direction you turn, you hit an obstacle there, there's objection. Objection is good for the better cause. Conservation is required because you need to sustain this mega biodiversity that is known in Johor.
Can I ask you if you could sort of give us some details about what has been preserved? Because Johor is home to several forest reserves.
Yeah.
We can talk about the degazettement of some of these forest reserves, but in terms of the commitment, at least from government policy levels, and what do we have preserved?
Okay, way back in the 80s, or starting the 70s, this area known as Endarompin saw the beginning of logging, not only within the state, some were crossing the border. So we were very concerned. Malaysian Nature Society in the 1980s began to do a lot of scientific research in the area and found that it was very rich. They had rhino there, they had big population of tigers, and trees that were indigenous or endemic to the area. For example, you have this palm called Livistena endauensis, which was like a whole hillock of it, you know. And what came out of that was MNS proposed to the state government that this is a very rich area in terms of biodiversity content. You say today we are the 12th richest in terms of mega biodiversity in the world. It doesn't ring a bell to anybody when you say mega biodiversity, but that research that went on for a few years did result in journals and books being published about how great the place and need to be conserved. So,
but Vincent, I want to ask you though, I mean, people are now starting to make a connection. I don't know if it's scientific, but it's and I don't know if there's a causal connection between what they see, extreme weather phenomena, right? Flooding.
Yeah.
That, I think, strikes the ordinary person as a very stark reminder that there is a connection between them, living in cities maybe, and the larger environment. That if the deforestation perhaps or uses of the land are now impacting the human population in ways that we haven't learned to manage well. How would you sort of describe Johor in those terms? Because we know that, and I think there was a Think City report on temperatures in cities in the peninsula, and Johor Bahru's surface temperature apparently has risen, not just by 6 degrees, 6.7 degrees to be precise, but it's one of the most rapid changes compared to other cities surveyed. Are there connections between the way the environment has been managed in Johor and the impact that we see, say, for instance, in surface temperatures?
Okay, we have to see this in totality. You look at the whole weather system. Is it only confined to Johor, or is it universal? This is a very, what you call a very complex and complicated subject matter. But I do agree that if you remove a lot of trees, the temperature will go up because the forests are able to perform their, what you call, the way that they survive is that they bring down the temperature because there's called latent heat. If you go under a tree, you get a shade, you feel that it is cooler. So multiply that by the thousands of acres, the ground will dry up if you remove all the trees. Temperature will go up definitely, but the way that the forestry department handle this is that they rotate the trees on a 25-year cycle, meaning that they classify the forest into uses. whether it's for recreational, conservation, production forests. So we cannot generalize to say that forestry is only keen in collecting all this cess for the state government. Otherwise, the government have no money. But they are very scientific in the way they manage. It's just that this sort of information does not get to the public. Every time they see a lorry load of logs, they start to curse and condemn, which is, in a way, they begin to correlate this loss of forest cover to temperature increase, which is actually true. But we are also tied down to the wind system for that particular year. Like now, you talk about El Nino, El Nina, that kind of thing, which was never talked about before. So as the knowledge base gathers momentum in terms of spreading out wide and clear, we begin to see there's definitely a definite pattern, Like Cameron Highland, for example, you talk about hitting 12 degrees those days. Today, you can get 18 or 16. It's very, very rare, And most of the time, it's around 22, 21. So I also feel that forest cover is necessary. And because of that, Johor is fortunate. We have 5 national parks. Mangrove is a forest type and a forest system, which is also being exploited, but we still have big stretches, meaning that whatever we have now, MLS is very concerned, is we're like a watchdog. A watchdog that barks very loud whenever there's a need. And because of this, I think, in a way, the government should be thankful that we still have today in Johor forest coverage of at least more than 25%, Like certain states, it's very low. But it doesn't mean that it would be there forever, because policies change, people change, ideas change. The demand for forests to be cleared for economic activities cannot be denied. But the question is, how do we contain it, you see?
Right. I'm speaking to Vincent Chow with the Malaysian Nature Society. We'll be back with more on Consider This. Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Sharaad Kuttan. I'm speaking to Vincent Chow. He's the Vice President of the Malaysian Nature Society. We're speaking about Johor. I want to come back to this this question you raised about gold mines just now. The gold mine is actually a project I think that's coming up, and it's a project with the palace in Johor as well as a Singaporean business interest. The area in which it's come out has been a focus of some investigative work by journalists in the Makaranga portal. Jamal Luang and Tenggaro forest reserves are the ones. Apparently, some 15,000 hectares were excised in 2014, one of the largest one-time excisions since 2000, in fact. And since then, about 21% of forests have been cleared in this degazetted area for exploitation with palm oil and such. So that's the facts on the ground, right? Nobody can deny it. The issue is the biodiversity that this area apparently represents in the northeast of the state. When you think about the loss of that biodiversity, are there consequences beyond the local?
There are two things here I could understand. First thing is, I don't know whether this body that went to investigate did realize that some of these areas are actually private property. Some may be state property, but the state also needs revenue. We cannot be blinded in the eye on one side and don't see the picture clearly. All right. Economic needs is always there. It's how do you do it? Which is to say, if you say 15,000 acres, are they going to clear all 15,000 acres at one go? Which would not be what you call environmentally sound. I'm sure they have been guided, and I'm sure they have experts with them. All right. But we cannot fathom the idea that we're going to lose 15,000 acres. The question is, are they prime forests? Are they sensitive forests with sensitive areas where certain species were required and nowhere else can they survive? So how subjective or objective are you in the way that you report the things, you see? I'm not to say that I'm supporting royalty, but I think we cannot assume that people are not thinking deeply about conservation also, because I have done many projects where some of these important people are concerned. They do care, honestly, you know. But then human being is such that when you have a mineral deposit in the ground, any country will exploit it for commercial gain. There's no doubt about it. And gold mining is not new to Johor. The Australians started mining here long ago in Mersing. All right, Mersing Hills. Today is going to be remined because there's still residual gold. So here you have conservationists on one side and business people on the other side. You will never be able to meet in the middle. For the simple reason is you don't see eye to eye with each other's objective and requirement.
Right. I do want to note that, you know, so some of the ways in which we have this public debate, to the extent there is a discussion, is to look at the consequences, right? So you say we kind of, in some ways there's a balance sheet, right, of what is gained and what is lost. And so the question is, what is specific to that area in terms of biodiversity, its uniqueness is often an argument for preservation. The other is the perhaps unintended consequence. And I know that in this area, at least it's reported, there has been an increase in animal-human conflict, in particular with elephants destroying palm oil, I believe. So there is this thing, and you're a veteran in this area. How can that be managed? Is it just the unfortunate consequence of the trade-offs we're making? Or are there better ways, best practices that can prevent or mitigate these losses?
Okay, if you look the whole area in the context of forest coverage, all right, you have to do serious study about the habits of wildlife, the migration habits, migration path, migration time. All this will need to be taken into consideration. And I'm very sure when you do gold mining, you will have to follow certain rules given by the DOE as guideline, what you can do, cannot do, because all the departments are involved. The wildlife has to come up with a plan, and you have to follow what they tell you to do. So we cannot assume that the guy who digs the gold will destroy everything. No way. You cannot dirty the water. You have to have catchment areas conserved and all that, because in total, the overall picture has not been seen by anybody yet. All right? We only assume that things will go this way or things will go that way. I'm sure no royalty or ruler of the state want to see historic totally destroyed and devoid of biodiversity. That I'm very sure, because they are all animal lovers. All right? So meaning that for an outsider to come and say that you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, the question is, what can you offer as a solution? Then I say, we will work with you. But I think the people who are exploiting this mineral in the soil definitely will have that kind of conscience, all right? Because the big word is S, capital S, that spells sustainability, all right? And that is number one. And there are actually a lot of this past experience that we have already picked up, what we should do and what we should not do. Definitely, you cannot go and clear 15,000 acres at one go. This will involve, you need the animals to move to a safer place. But the whole area there is linked to which, it's linked to Panti Forest Reserve, it's linked to Endarampin. So meaning that you also have to think in terms of the central nervous spine, the forest spine, which is a continuity from the north. And
but that's a policy. I know it's been written, the central forest spine policy, but it's not ever been implemented. And part of the problem it seems is the kind of federal nature of the peninsula.
Yes and no. You see, yes, because the State Department of Forestry, I'm involved in it. You know, for example, Panti now is declared the whole forest of 12,000 acres will be used for ecotourism, conservation, and scientific study, and no more logging is allowed. All right. So this is probably in preparation for the movement of animals from this Tenggaro area that will come into here, which is good. But animals are what you call creatures of habits. If the elephants will walk across the road and go bash into a plantation, he will do that because that was his forest before. We are the actually introduced in the sense, all right? But because of economic gains, we intrude as we like, we intrude freely without taking consideration of that. Which to say, the other party on the other side are protecting the wildlife. This side is protecting what they're going to make out of the land. So can we meet somewhere? I say yes, because they will listen to you, but do it the right way.
Okay, okay. In the remaining minutes that we have, I mean, where do you think Johor can do better in terms of managing the environment? Whether it's inland or in the coastal regions, and I know under tremendous pressure, the Forest City project made headlines partly because it was going to change the hydraulic system of the straits and so on and so forth. Where do you think are the top places, top priorities for a state government in managing these issues?
I think the state government was very proactive since the 80s. And I was directly involved with the chief ministers and directors of forestry as well as the national park. And the fact is we have the most national park in Malaysia, speaks loudly about conservation. And I think the early leaders in the state government were very, what you call, receptive of what MNS told them, advised them to do. You know? And as a result, we have still vast stretches of mangrove. And that is not to be exploited because we require the kind of protection for the coast. And there are a lot of this conservation project done all over the place. As a result, today, you still have that kind of forest stand, you still have that kind of island, which is like not permitted for exploitation for tourism. And even the state ruler took over for the one reason is for conservation. And there's one in Pulau Tengah, you have a private sector going there to do conservation of turtles. And I will mention that place as Batu under our very pro-environment Dato' Chua. He has gathered a lot of foreign scientists to be regular visitors to do research for him, and he set up this very well. They must have hatched out a lot of baby turtles over the years that they operated. So things like this, we have to give like sufficient coverage. And as long as you don't cover what people are interested to do, we just imagine that destruction is the order of the day. And I also say that nature mends itself very well. I was one of the very vocal, what do you call, guy around when forest leaders started to destroy that part of the streets. And I went to photograph, and it broke my heart to see, thousands of this sea organism dying by the day because they brought in river sand, which has a lot of fertilizer residue, and the sea creatures couldn't take it, and they died like that, and it died over time. Today, I was a bit surprised to see that the seagrass came back. Many, they did intervene, and some universities, like my good friend Professor Bujang and gang, they did some replanting. Slow, but surely it will return. And now we are looking at the place, the birds have come back, sea creatures have come back. So I was all gloom and doom in thoughts, but now I'm pleasantly surprised that nature returned. So meaning that if you do it the right way, all right, there's always a solution to a problem. But if you take a problem and be critical but offer no solution, it gives us a lot of pain unnecessarily, thinking that we cannot just do anything at all, but we have to do it correctly.
Right. Thank you so much, Vincent. That's been a wonderful discussion, given some balance to the picture of the environmental challenges in Johor. That's all we have for tonight on Consider This. I'm Sharaad Kuttan for Astro AWANI.